Picture this. You're rewatching Dragon Ball for the 100th time and suddenly you notice something off. That's what happened to me, and it led me down a rabbit hole of discovering the biggest problems in each saga. Dragon Ball isn't just another anime or manga. It's a series that changed the game, mixing action, adventure, and humor in a way that influenced countless stories after it. I think it's fair to say that without Dragon Ball, the anime landscape would look pretty different today. But here's the thing, even legendary series have their flaws. In this video, I'm going to look at what I think are the biggest issues in each saga that might change how you see Dragon Ball. But don't worry, this isn't about bashing the series that we all love. It's about appreciating its complexity and maybe even starting some interesting discussions amongst fans. Ready for a hot take? From Emperor Pilaf to the 21st World Tournament, something just feels off. And I think it's part of the reason why so many fans have watched or read Dragon Ball Z, but not the original Dragon Ball. Let's talk about the Emperor Pilaf Saga. It's the beginning of the beloved Dragon Ball journey, but it's not exactly what you'd expect from a series that became famous for its epic battles. Instead of intense martial arts action, we get a heavy dose of humor and adventure. Now don't get me wrong, that's not a bad thing. But for fans who came in expecting non-stop fighting from the get-go, it might be a little bit of a letdown. So here's my problem with the first saga. I'll be honest, the first saga is kinda boring to me. It feels like Toriyama was still finding his footing, trying to figure out exactly what he wanted Dragon Ball to be. The laid-back feeling is there, but it just doesn't capture the excitement that we associate with later arcs. It's like watching a superhero movie where the hero spends most of the time doing everyday chores. Sure, it might be relatable, but is it what we signed up for? This initial tone sets up a weird expectation for new viewers. Imagine recommending Dragon Ball to a friend, hyping up all the amazing fights, and then they start watching only to find comedy and mild adventures. It's like promising someone a roller coaster ride and taking them on a merry-go-round instead. Not exactly the adrenaline rush they were hoping for, but here's where things start to shift. Enter the 21st World Tournament Saga. This is where we begin to see more of the martial arts elements that would eventually define the series. It's like Dragon Ball is slowly waking up, stretching its muscles, and getting ready for the intense action that we all know and love. The tournament format introduces us to new characters, higher stakes, and more impressive displays of skill. This transition raises an interesting question. Did these early sagas set the right foundation for what Dragon Ball will become? On one hand, the gradual shift from comedy to action allows for character development and world building. We get to know Goku as more than just a fighting machine. We see his innocence, his growth, and his relationships with other characters. But on the other hand, this slow burn may have turned off some potential fans who were looking for immediate action. From strictly a tournament standpoint, I don't believe the 21st World Tournament has too many issues outside of having characters that just aren't very memorable. In comparison to other tournaments in later Dragon Ball and even Dragon Ball Z, the characters in this first tournament just aren't very memorable. So I just mentioned how there was a shift from the laid back tone to the more fighting and aggressive tone that was present in the World Tournament Saga, but as jarring as that shift was, the Red Ribbon Army Saga cranks things up even further. But here's a question for you. Despite introducing a massive threat, did this saga make a crucial mistake? The answer lies in what's missing, not what's there. The Red Ribbon Army Saga is where Dragon Ball really starts to flex its muscles. We see Goku's power growing, taking on an entire army single-handedly. It's exciting, action-packed, and introduces some cool new characters. But here's the thing. While the Red Ribbon Army is a formidable organization, it lacks a singular compelling antagonist. Think about it. We have General Blue, Colonel Silver, Commander Red, and a whole host of other officers, but none of them really stand out as the big bad of the saga. I mean, I know some people might say Commander Red, he was in charge, but he's not one of those antagonists to look back and said, oh yeah, that was a good villain. Again, I compare it to a superhero movie where the hero fights a bunch of henchmen but never faces off against the main villain. Imagine the Frieza saga where Goku fights against Queen, Dodoria, Zarbon, and Jace, Berta, and Ginyu, and that's it. He never goes up against Frieza. That significantly changes that story for the worse. The lack of a central antagonist creates a strange pacing issue. The saga bounces from one mini-boss to another, never really building up to a satisfying climax. And speaking of bouncing from one boss to another, the saga also spans multiple locations and introduces a variety of minor characters and enemies. While this was good for Dragon Ball's world building, the story also lost focus at times. We go from snowy landscapes to desert fortresses to underwater bases. It's a whirlwind tour of the Dragon Ball universe, but sometimes it feels like we're just ticking off locations on a checklist rather than following a cohesive narrative. The sheer number of side quests and villains makes it feel like the story drifts off into unrelated tangents before returning to the main conflict. Remember Goku's detour to Penguin Village? It's a fun crossover with Dr. Slump, but it doesn't really advance the main plot. These diversions, while they can be entertaining, can make the saga feel bloated and unfocused. So I guess I have two big problems with the Red Ribbon Army saga. The first being that there is not a good main antagonist, and two, it's all over the place. There's too many detours, too many different locations, and we kinda get off track at times. But here is where we take a significant leap in the quality of the story. Remember when Dragon Ball was all about martial arts tournaments and mystical adventures? The King Piccolo Saga flipped that script entirely. But here's the kicker. This game-changing arc may have set the series on a path that would eventually become its own worst enemy. The 22nd World Tournament was great. I don't have any issues with it, but I don't want people to think I'm skipping over it. It's just that I think the 22nd World Tournament and the stuff with Demon King Piccolo are all one saga. Now, the 22nd World Tournament kicked things off with a bang, seamlessly transitioning into the King Piccolo Saga. This arc was nothing short of revolutionary for the series. It introduced us to a villain so powerful, so menacing, that it shifted the entire focus of Dragon Ball. Gone were the days of lighthearted humor and whimsical adventures. King Piccolo wasn't just another bad guy. This Demon King set a precedent for future sagas by establishing a model of a strong antagonist that would dominate the plot. It's a trend we continue to see later with villains like Frieza and Cell, but was this a good thing for Dragon Ball in the long run? On one hand, the introduction of such a formidable foe raised the stakes dramatically. Was it too dramatic? That's up for you to decide. The battles became more intense, the character development more profound. Fans were on the edge of their seats wondering how Goku could possibly overcome such a threat. It was exciting, it was thrilling, and it kept us coming back for more. But here's where things get complicated. I think the success of the King Piccolo Saga created a bit of a dilemma for the series. Each new villain had to be stronger than the last to keep that sense of threat and excitement. This led to what we call power creep, and that is the main problem with this saga. Now I know it may not affect this saga specifically, but this is the first time where I think power creep really made itself known in Dragon Ball, and of course it affected the rest of the franchise. Think about it. After King Piccolo, how could any Earth-based threat feel significant? The Piccolo Saga essentially pushed Dragon Ball into a corner. The bar was set so high that subsequent arcs struggled to match the intensity, because I will give the King Piccolo Saga this. Even though the characters are so weak in comparison to what we know now, that saga was intense. The stakes felt high when I first watched it, and they still feel high now. But that drastic escalation, I think it might have changed things for the worse. Alright, now let's talk about the Piccolo Jr Saga, or just a 23rd World Tournament. This story had some of the most memorable fights in the series, the first and, to my knowledge, only marriage proposal in Dragon Ball, but I think the problem with it is that it wasn't really additive. I do think Goku and Piccolo having their fight was a big deal, but I think that every saga before this significantly added to the story of Dragon Ball. It changed things up in some kind of way. Piccolo coming back and fighting Goku didn't change anything. Introducing the character of Piccolo Jr does change things, because he would go on to be one of the 5 to 10 most important characters in the franchise, but this saga doesn't introduce any new aspects. Like I said previously for the Demon King Piccolo Saga, the power creep does kind of start to get ridiculous here, because we see just how far ahead Goku and Piccolo are in comparison to everyone else. But I want to go back to my main point that this saga just didn't add anything new. The repetitive tournament structure, the power scaling problems, and the over-reliance on Goku are all elements that were introduced before this saga. It's like the Piccolo Jr Saga was both a love letter to everything that made Dragon Ball great up to that point, but also a blueprint for its future challenges. On one hand, it gave us everything we loved about the series: great fights, character moments, and a satisfying conclusion. On the other hand, it set up patterns that would eventually lead to some fans feeling like the series was getting stale. So what do you think? What are your biggest problems in each saga of the original Dragon Ball series? And I know you do, so let me know where you disagree with mine. Regardless of what we all say, Dragon Ball remains one of the most beloved and influential anime series ever. It's like the flaws are part of its charm at this point. So let me know down in the comments what the biggest problems in each Dragon Ball saga was for you. And with that being said, if you haven't already, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this. So with that being said, this is BigTune, and thanks for watching. Y'all have a good one.